They both knew from the beginning that it wasn't real. That was the only reason she had agreed. She needed stability, something that looked convincing enough to silence questions, protect her job, and keep her complicated family at bay. He needed an image, clean, respectable, and temporary, to secure a deal that required him to look settled, dependable, untangled. Their agreement was simple, written more in conversation than on paper. They would pretend to be together, share a living space, appear close in public, and remain strangers in private. No feelings, no expectations, no crossing lines. She was practical, guarded, and painfully honest with herself. Emotions, in her world, were liabilities. She had learned that the hard way. He, on the other hand, was controlled, disciplined, and unreadable. A man who spoke little but seemed to notice everything. Where she reacted, he calculated. Where she questioned, he decided. Their personalities clashed quietly, like opposing currents forced into the same narrow space. From the first night under the same roof, boundaries were drawn sharply. Separate rooms. No personal questions. No late-night conversations. No touching beyond what was necessary in public. They rehearsed smiles, practiced body language, learned how close was believable without being intimate. In front of others, they played their parts flawlessly, shared looks, casual familiarity, polite affection. Behind closed doors, the air felt heavier, loaded with things unsaid. There was distrust on both sides. She didn't fully believe his motives, and he never explained more than required. They watched each other carefully, measuring words, guarding reactions. Yet, beneath the caution, something else existed, something neither acknowledged. A glance held a second too long. A silence that felt louder than it should. A strange awareness of the other's presence, even when nothing was happening at all. She told herself it was tension born of inconvenience. He told himself it was irrelevant. After all, this was pretend, temporary, safe. And yet, every rule they set felt less like protection and more like a warning, because somewhere between the rehearsed smiles and the carefully kept distance, attraction lingered quietly, uninvited, waiting for a moment neither of them believed would ever come. To the world outside, they were effortless together. In public spaces, surrounded by curious eyes and unspoken judgments, they slipped into their roles with practiced ease. His hand would rest lightly at her lower back, guiding her through crowded rooms. She would lean in just enough, her smile warm, her laughter timed perfectly. Friends commented on how natural they looked, how well they balanced each other. Family members relaxed, convinced that this was real, solid, dependable. Every performance was flawless, every appearance convincing. But the moment the doors closed and the audience disappeared, the ease vanished. Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Their movements became careful again, deliberate. She would busy herself with meaningless tasks, straightening things that didn't need fixing. He would retreat into stillness, phone in hand, pretending focus. The contrast between who they were outside and who they became alone felt jarring, almost disorienting. Yet, the lie had a way of seeping into the quiet moments. Small gestures slipped through without permission. He would pour her coffee in the morning without asking, remembering how she liked it. She would straighten his collar before a public appearance, her fingers lingering a fraction too long. These actions were never discussed, never acknowledged, but they changed the air between them. At night, passing each other in narrow hallways, their shoulders would brush accidentally, sending a ripple of awareness neither wanted to examine. Their eyes met more often now, holding just a second longer than necessary. Each time, they pulled back, reminding themselves of the rules, of the reasons this arrangement existed. They told themselves it was just good acting, that the gestures were habits, nothing more. But slowly, subtly, the line between performance and reality began to blur. And in those quiet moments, when no one was watching, the lie felt dangerously close to becoming something else entirely. By the time they returned home that night, exhaustion weighed on them in different ways. The day had demanded too much, too many smiles, too many questions, too many moments where they had to stand close and pretend it meant nothing. Her head throbbed with everything she hadn't said, every emotion she had carefully packed away behind polite expressions. He moved more slowly than usual, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, carrying a fatigue that had less to do with work and more to do with restraint. A simple misunderstanding changed everything. A guest room unexpectedly occupied, a light left on, a door locked, an assumption made and not clarified. By the time they realized it, there was only one space left that made sense for the night. Neither of them commented on it directly. Words felt risky, capable of exposing too much. They agreed with brief nods and neutral expressions, both pretending the situation was temporary, insignificant. The room felt smaller than it should have. The silence between them was heavy, charged with awareness. She sat at the edge of the bed, arms folded tightly, staring at nothing in particular. He stood near the window, looking out, as if distance could be created simply by facing away. Every movement was measured, every breath too noticeable. They avoided each other's eyes, afraid of what might surface if they didn't. Thoughts raced quietly, memories of the day, the way his hand had steadied her in public, the way she had laughed at something only he noticed. None of it felt accidental anymore. Still, neither spoke. Naming the tension would make it real, and reality was something they weren't ready to face. So they settled into silence, sharing the space, but not the truth, both clinging to the fragile idea that pretending was still safer than admitting how close the line had become. She woke to warmth before awareness, the unfamiliar weight of another presence pressing gently against her back. For a moment, she didn't understand where she was, or why the room felt smaller, closer, filled with someone else's breath. Then reality rushed in. His arm was draped loosely around her waist, his body aligned with hers in a way that felt accidental, yet undeniably intimate. Panic flickered through her chest, sharp and immediate, followed by a racing awareness she couldn't silence. Time seemed to pause. She lay perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement would shatter something fragile and dangerous. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, loud enough that she was certain he could feel it. Every detail became overwhelming. The steady rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his breath near her neck, the solid reassurance of him so close. None of this had been planned. None of it fit within the rules they had so carefully drawn. He stirred slightly, just enough to let her know he was awake, or becoming aware. His breathing changed, slowing, deepening, as realization settled in. Neither of them moved. The silence between them felt charged, electric, filled with questions neither dared to ask. Confusion tangled with instinct, and the comfort of the moment clashed painfully with fear. She told herself it meant nothing. That bodies shifted in sleep. That exhaustion explained everything. But her thoughts betrayed her, spiraling into places she had avoided for weeks. The closeness felt too natural, too right, and that terrified her more than the situation itself. Pretending was safe. This was not. He was rigid now, holding himself perfectly still, as if restraint alone could undo the moment. She could feel the tension in him, the same struggle mirrored in her own chest. Something unspoken passed between them, heavy and undeniable. This wasn't acting. There was no audience, no reason to perform. When she finally moved, slowly creating space between them, the loss of warmth felt abrupt. Neither spoke. The morning had crossed a line, leaving behind a truth they could no longer ignore. Together silently, they moved apart almost at once, as if distance could erase what had just happened. She turned away, focusing on anything except the memory of warmth she still felt on her skin. He sat up, already composed, already guarded, his expression carefully neutral. No one mentioned the morning. No one apologized. They dressed in silence, the air thick with things they refused to name. Breakfast was a performance of normalcy that felt more exhausting than any public appearance. She busied herself with routine, asking safe, meaningless questions she didn't care about. He answered politely, briefly, keeping his eyes on his phone, the table, anywhere but her. The closeness from moments before now felt like a secret neither knew how to carry. Inside, her thoughts spiraled. She replayed the moment again and again, searching for a version where it didn't matter, where it hadn't shaken something loose inside her. She told herself she had imagined the intensity, that exhaustion had blurred her senses. Still, her chest tightened whenever she remembered how natural it had felt, how reluctant she had been to move away. That realization scared her more than the closeness itself. He withdrew further as the day went on. Where he had once lingered, he now kept distance. Where he had spoken easily, he now chose silence. The rules echoed loudly in his mind, every boundary suddenly fragile. He had agreed to pretend, not to feel. Crossing that line, even unintentionally, felt dangerous, unfair, irreversible. So he pulled back, convincing himself it was protection, not fear. She noticed, of course. The space between them grew heavier, charged with denial and unanswered questions. Both pretended nothing had changed, even as everything quietly had. The change didn't announce itself loudly. It crept in through small, almost invisible moments that neither of them could fully explain. He began noticing details he had once ignored. The way she grew quiet when tired, the slight crease between her brows when she was worried, how she always checked twice to make sure doors were locked. It unsettled him, how instinctive his awareness had become, how quickly concern rose in his chest without permission. She noticed it too, the way his gaze lingered when someone stood too close to her in public, how his voice sharpened subtly when her name was mentioned by someone else. Once, when a conversation grew uncomfortable, he stepped closer without thinking, placing himself just enough between her and the tension. The gesture was small, easily dismissible, but it stayed with her long after. Jealousy surfaced quietly, disguised as irritation. She felt it when she saw him laughing with someone else, even though she had no right to care. He felt it when someone praised her, when attention lingered on her longer than necessary. Neither acknowledged these reactions. Instead, they swallowed them, labeling the feelings as side effects of proximity, nothing more. Concern became habitual. A late reply sparked worry. A tired expression prompted questions neither had asked before. He remembered her schedule. She remembered his preferences. These weren't part of the agreement. They were slipping into something unplanned, something dangerously real. Internally, both struggled. She told herself that caring was natural when sharing space, that attachment didn't equal affection. Still, her heart betrayed her logic, responding to his presence in ways she couldn't control. He reminded himself that this arrangement had an expiration, that emotional involvement would only complicate things. Yet the thought of walking away no longer felt simple. The lie had begun to shape the truth. The pretending blurred into instinct, the boundaries softened, and the distance they once relied on felt harder to maintain. Neither was ready to admit it, but the act they had perfected was no longer just a performance. It was changing them, quietly and irrevocably, turning something temporary into something they were both afraid to name. The moment came unexpectedly, sparked by something small that carried too much weight. A comment overheard, a decision made without explanation, a plan changed at the last minute. She felt excluded, dismissed, reminded sharply of how temporary her place in his life truly was. He, already strained, misread her silence as accusation. The tension they had been carefully avoiding finally snapped. Words rose fast and sharp, cutting through restraint. She accused him of control, of keeping her close only when it suited the image they were selling. He fired back with cold logic, reminding her that this had always been an arrangement, nothing more. The room felt tight, charged, every sentence pushing them closer to something they had both feared. Anger stripped away caution. She spoke of feeling invisible one moment and exposed the next, of not knowing where she stood anymore. He snapped that lines had been crossed, that the pretending was becoming dangerous, that he was losing control of something he had promised himself he wouldn't. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither could take back. Then came the truths neither had planned to reveal. She admitted that the pretending no longer felt harmless, that walking away didn't feel easy anymore. He admitted, almost against his will, that distance hadn't protected him the way he thought it would, that pulling back hadn't erased what had already settled in his chest. The silence that followed was louder than the argument. They stood facing each other, breathing unevenly, aware that something fundamental had cracked open. The armor they had relied on, rules, logic, distance, no longer held. Nothing was resolved in that moment. No apologies followed, but the fight left behind clarity neither could escape. Whatever this was, it was no longer contained by the word pretend, and now that the truth had slipped out, neither of them knew how to put it back. His silence had never been empty. It was layered, deliberate, built over years of learning what closeness could cost. Long before this arrangement before her, he had trusted once and paid for it deeply. Emotional dependence had taught him loss, had shown him how quickly affection could turn into leverage, weakness, regret. He had learned to survive by keeping people at a careful distance, by controlling narratives before they could control him. When the opportunity to pretend came, it felt safe. A performance without risk, a connection without vulnerability. Agreeing to the arrangement wasn't about convenience alone. It was strategy. Pretending allowed him to meet expectations without opening doors he had spent years sealing shut. No real emotions meant no real damage. He could play the part flawlessly, step out when it ended, untouched. Or so he believed. That morning shattered something he didn't realize was already fragile. Waking up beside her, feeling the quiet trust of shared space, stirred something painfully familiar. It wasn't desire alone that unsettled him. It was the comfort, the ease, the absence of fear in that moment before awareness fully set in. It reminded him of a version of himself he had buried, one that believed closeness didn't have to end in loss. That realization frightened him more than the closeness itself. He had spent years convincing himself that emotional distance was strength, that silence was safety. But with her, silence felt heavier. It carried questions, possibilities, risks he wasn't sure he could survive again. He pulled away because staying felt like standing on unstable ground. Every glance, every shared moment threatened to undo the careful balance he had maintained. He worried that if he allowed himself even a step closer, the pretend would collapse entirely, leaving him exposed. Inside, he wrestled with contradiction. He wanted to protect her from his uncertainty, yet he feared hurting her by withdrawing. He wanted to believe that feelings could be controlled, yet his body and instincts betrayed him. The morning had awakened a truth he wasn't ready to face, that pretending had only given his heart permission to feel again. And now, silence was the only shield he knew how to hold, even as it slowly failed him. She had thought she understood the arrangement, thought she had neatly filed her emotions under temporary and safe. The pretending had allowed her to feel without consequence, to navigate proximity without surrendering herself. Smiles could be practiced, touches could be measured, and boundaries could be maintained, all while keeping her heart intact. But that morning, when the accidental closeness had forced reality into her chest, everything shifted. For the first time, she admitted to herself that the feelings she had been hiding, denying, and rationalizing were not part of the performance. They were real. Every glance that lingered too long, every small gesture that felt deliberate rather than casual, now carried weight she could no longer ignore. Her chest tightened at the thought of him, her mind replaying moments where her heart had betrayed her reason. It wasn't just attraction. It was concern, awareness, and a desire for connection that went beyond acting. She had loved the safety of pretending, the rules that kept consequences distant. Yet those rules had been stripped away in an instant. Now, with him close in ways she couldn't control, she felt raw, exposed, and entirely vulnerable. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exciting because she finally understood the depth of her own heart. Terrifying because acknowledging it meant stepping into unknown territory, where outcomes were uncertain and emotions could not be neatly managed. She noticed every detail of him more acutely now. The subtle tension in his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he thought no one was watching, the quiet movements that suggested more than he let on. Every instinct, every fleeting thought, confirmed that this was no longer pretend. The lines between acting and reality had blurred, leaving her in a space she had never occupied before, aware, unguarded, and undeniably in love, whether she wanted to admit it or not. The tension had been building for days, unspoken but heavy, and finally, neither could bear the weight any longer. It started with a glance, a pause too long, a small slip of a gesture that revealed what had been lurking beneath the surface. They found themselves face to face, in a quiet room where no one could watch, where the world's expectations could not interfere. The air felt dense, every heartbeat echoing louder than necessary, every breath a reminder of the fragile distance that had kept them both safe. She spoke first, her voice low but steady, carrying all the courage she had summoned. "We can't keep pretending anymore," she said, her eyes searching his, daring him to lie or look away. It's not just acting. I know that now, and I can't go back to ignoring it. He listened, every muscle tense, his usual calm facade strained. For a moment, he said nothing, letting the silence stretch between them. Then he finally spoke, his voice measured, careful but undeniably sincere. I've been pretending for years, he admitted. To everyone else, to myself. But I can't pretend with you. Not anymore. And I can't walk away. Not after what I've realized. The words hung in the space, heavier than either expected. Neither spoke of the past moments that had sparked confusion, jealousy, or hesitation. They didn't need to. The truth was in the way they looked at each other now, in the recognition that what had begun as performance had become something entirely different. The choice was clear, but the gravity of it pressed down on both of them. Step back, maintain distance, preserve safety, and live with the void. Or step forward, acknowledge the feelings, and risk the unknown. The moment demanded honesty, courage, and vulnerability, and for the first time, neither tried to hide. Finally, slowly, carefully, they took the first step toward each other, not because it was safe, not because it was simple, but because it was real. In that moment, the pretending ended. Reality had arrived, messy, emotional, and impossible to ignore. And with it came a sense of relief, of connection, and a fragile hope neither had allowed themselves to feel until now. They didn't rush it. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, only quiet decisions and small, deliberate actions that spoke louder than words. In the days that followed their confrontation, every glance, every touch, and every shared moment carried a sincerity that had been absent before. Pretending was no longer necessary. It had served its purpose, and now they could allow themselves to be real. She noticed the changes immediately. He didn't distance himself when she laughed or made a small mistake. He offered support without expectation, concern without calculation. She, in turn, allowed herself to relax, to speak freely, to move naturally without rehearsing every word or action. The invisible walls that had once separated them were slowly dissolving, replaced by trust. Trust, fragile but growing, became the foundation of something new. They no longer measured their words or gestures for performance. Instead, they measured them by care, by attentiveness, by the desire to protect the quiet bond forming between them. It was subtle, understated, and profoundly intimate, not in the physical sense, but in the way two hearts began to recognize and respond to one another. In this transformation, they discovered the beauty of truth. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, but it was steady, grounding, and honest. Pretend smiles and carefully measured gestures were replaced by genuine affection, laughter that reached the eyes, and shared silences that felt comforting rather than tense. For the first time, they understood what it meant to choose honesty over fear, vulnerability over control, and connection over distance. The relationship had shifted, no longer an act, but a promise, quiet, real, and enduring. Looking back, she realized how strange it had all been, that what began as a lie had revealed truths neither of them had expected to face. The pretending had been a mask, yes, but behind it, their hearts had been speaking softly, waiting for permission to be heard. Every rehearsed smile, every carefully measured touch, every silent glance had carried meaning they hadn't admitted even to themselves. Love, she understood now, wasn't about perfect timing or grand gestures. It wasn't about fireworks or declarations. It was in the quiet moments where vulnerability was allowed to peek through the cracks in carefully built walls. It was in the patience to see the other person, really see them, without judgment or pretense. It was in the courage to step closer despite fear, to acknowledge feelings that might not be safe, convenient, or simple. He had discovered it too. The walls he had built around his heart, crafted over years of caution and past hurts, had softened when he didn't expect it. The pretend arrangement, meant to protect him from risk, had instead forced him to confront what he had been hiding from himself. In allowing her in, he had learned that connection could be gentle, trust could be earned, and that closeness could feel like safety instead of danger. Sometimes, pretending doesn't conceal the heart, it reveals it. It exposes what has always been there, quietly waiting. And when the walls fall, even just a little, love begins, not with spectacle, but with honesty, with presence, and with the courage to be seen as you truly are. In that realization, they found not only each other, but the truest version of themselves.